Greetings gentlemen, I am back with a new Naruto fanfiction video. This time it's the true horror of Konoha. Something happened to Naruto on his 7th birthday that was so bad it broke him. The Sandaime Hokage had to put him in confinement for the safety of the village. But 5 years later, things come to light and Hiruzen wonders if he had made a mistake. Before the video starts, hit that like button and subscribe so I can continue making these videos. Click that bell icon so you never miss a future video. Also watch this video in 1.5 times speed to make it more enjoyable. Without further ado, enjoy the video as always. Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandaime Hokage of Konoha, was not happy. He should have known that something would happen. It always did, but on this particular day of the year, it was always the worst. He thought he could trust his Anbu, and he thought he could trust most of his council, but after this, he just didn't know who he could trust anymore. Making his way down the hospital corridor to a special room, set aside for when something like this happened, sending nurses and doctors alike to their knees at his barely contained killing intent, he could feel his temper rise more and more at just the thought. Flashback: Sarutobi was bored and sat in yet another boring council meeting that seemed to have nothing to do with him. All they were talking about was civilian affairs, nothing to do with shinobi. He looked around at all the people present, the civilian council, 30 of the most annoying people in the world, that just seemed to blend into each other, nothing really standing out. The shinobi council, however, was made up of all the clan heads of Konoha, the Aburame, Akamichi, Hyuga, Inuzuka, Nara, Yamanaka, and of course his own clan, the Sarutobi. Then there were the village elders, Omura, Koharu, and Danzo, his old teammates and former best friend. Over the years they had become more and more distant. They still talked, but it was always about village affairs. He felt a pang of regret for that. They used to be the best of friends, but now it was like they were strangers. It was then that he noticed for the first time that all of the civilian council seemed nervous. He picked up all the little things, the way that some of them kept looking from the clock to him, the nervous whispers between 2 or 3 council members, and the fact that they all seemed to be sweating. His instincts were screaming. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Then it hit him. The room suddenly became very quiet. All eyes in the room shot to the old Hokage in fear. His killing intent seemed to become visible as a dark aura surrounded him. Slowly, he started to stand up, his head lowered. And what have you done? And what? He asked in a whisper. Everyone in the room suddenly stopped what they were doing, all turning their full attention to the old Hokage. They could barely hear what he said. Even the shinobi had to strain their ears. Everything in the room was quiet. Nobody wanted to be the first to break the silence that seemed to have spread around the room, holding all those inside the room, squeezing their chest, and stealing their words before they could even think of what to say. Surprisingly, it was one of the civilian councils that broke the silence. He looked like any other middle-aged civilian, with short brown hair, brown eyes, and wearing a simple gray kimono. He stood up slowly, carefully, as if he was scared of making any sudden movements. And what do you mean? And what? He stuttered out, and by the end of his question, he was shaking. And what? Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I wouldn't realize something was going on? I may be old, but I am not senile yet. Now, tell me, what have you done? And quote. By the end of Hiruzen's mini-rant, he had gone from a soft whisper to nearly shouting at the top of his voice. Slowly standing, he still did not raise his head to look at the now truly frightened men and women sitting across from him in their seats, his eyes hidden in the shadows of his Hokage hat. Omura, Koharu, and Danzo all looked at their old friend in both fear and surprise. But what many, if they were looking at them instead of the old Hokage, would be shocked to see the barely restrained hope in their eyes. Finally, after a few more minutes of silence, Koharu spoke. And quote. Hiruzen, what's wrong? And quote. She asked her old friend. It was at this point that Sarutobi finally lifted his head so that all present could see his eyes. They were not the soft, caring eyes of the old man that so many had come to know. They were as hard as steel, and the pupils of his eyes shrunken in anger. His voice ice cold. Sarutobi spoke. And quote. Why are we here? Why are we all here? These are not shinobi matters. So far we have heard nothing that couldn't wait until the next official council meeting. So why are we here? And quote. At the end of his questions, he spoke each of his last words with emphasis. And quote. I was told that there was an important matter that must be discussed, and yet we have been here for 4 hours straight, and all you have talked about is basic information that has no real importance at all. So I ask you, why are we here? And quote. Again, nobody spoke, nobody moved, the tension in the room becoming more and more intense with every passing minute. It was then that he asked a question that had a very big effect on the room. And quote. What is the date? And quote. Those 4 words froze all those in the room, the civilians in fear and the shinobi in sudden realization. Everything was quiet. Then the killing intent in the room seemed to, if possible, increase tenfold. All the shinobi clan heads and the 3 elders added their own killing intent to the old Hokages. Suddenly, having not been able to stand the killing intent in the room any longer, one of the civilians, a woman in her late 20s, with black hair, pink eyes, and an expensive-looking black kimono with an image of a sakura tree in bloom, stood up and screamed in a high-pitched voice. And quote. We did what you were too afraid to do. And by now it's too late. The Kyuubi is dead, and all the people it killed that night have been avenged and quote. It was then that a very pissed Inuzuka Sume shot to her feet, practical frothing at the mouth, along with every other clan head in the room, effectively shutting the woman up. And quote. You fucking fool. Are you so stupid that you actually think that a 7-year-old boy is the Kyuubi? If that was true, we would all be dead by now. And quote. At those words caused some of the civilians' eyes to open wide in realization, and looks of absolute horror crossed their faces. What had they done? Despite what many would believe, many of the shinobi in Konoha didn't hold a grudge against the boy. Some did, mostly those that lost everything in the attack 7 years ago, but most didn't act on this hate beyond glares and harsh words. Every now and then they would join in with the civilians if there was a mob, but they weren't ninjas for long after that. Before anything else could happen, Nara Shikaku started moving to the large wooden doors, a rare serious expression on his normally bored face. And quote. We don't have time for this. We need to try and stop whatever is happening before it's too late." And quote. That was all it took to snap the attention of all the people in the room, the clan heads, elders, and Sarutobi himself all quickly making their way to the doors. But before he pushed the doors open, he paused, looking back at the members of the civilian council, and left them with one more thing to think about. And quote, "If anything has happened to Naruto, anything, I will come back here, and when I do I will show you why they called me the God of Shinobi. Anbu. Make sure none of them leave this room before I come back." And quote. Seemingly out of nowhere, 5 animal masked ninjas appeared in the room. And with that, he pushed the doors open, only to stop dead in his tracks at the sound that assaulted his and everyone else's ears. He absently thought that someone must have applied a silencing seal to the door while they were in the room. It was the only way to explain why none of them heard the terrifying scream that seemed to echo across the village. End flashback. When Sarutobi finally got to the room, he stopped at the door. He wasn't sure if he could go in. From what he saw when they got to the scene, he knew that it would be bad. It was a miracle, depending on your definition of the word, that he was even alive. Finally raising his courage and taking a deep breath, he pushed the sliding door open. His breath hitched at what was before him. A small, malnourished 7-year-old boy hooked up to several different machines, lying on a hospital bed that made him look even smaller than he was. His entire body was covered from head to toe in bandages. The only parts of his body that were visible through the bandages were his eyes. Walking into the room, Sarutobi sat in the single chair set next to the bed. As he looked at the boy, he began to feel tears falling down his face. In a matter of seconds, the old Hokage seemed to look older. And quote, "I'm so sorry, Naruto. If I had realized what was going on sooner, I could have stopped this. You should never have had to go through that. No one should." And quote. By the time the old shinobi had gotten over his shock from hearing the scream, he and all the others were too late. They found the young boy in the middle of a large crowd, tied to a log in the center of a large fire. Every now and then someone would throw more wood onto the fire or the occasional bottle at the still screaming boy. But what really got to the group that had just arrived on the scene was that the boy seemed to be healing at the same rate. He was burning. Whatever clothes he had been wearing was burned away long ago, giving a clear view of the young child's skin as it sizzled away and then grew back. And then they noticed something that really made him sick. He was still conscious, still screaming. And those people just stood there, laughing and cheering. After he had slaughtered half the people in the crowd in a blind rage, and sent whoever was left to Ibiki, they quickly rushed the boy to the hospital. That was 12 hours ago, and in that time they had found out a lot about what had happened. It seemed that the civilian council had managed to round up a small number of Hiruzen's ninjas to help them in their vendetta against the boy. As soon as the meeting was underway, they had applied a silencing seal to the door. After that, they surprised the Anbu guarding the boy and knocked him out, then moved on to drag the poor boy out of his apartment. The mob then proceeded to beat the boy to within an inch of his life. When they had their fill of beating the poor boy, they tied him to a post, and after some big speech from one Miss Haruno that included telling the barely conscious Naruto that the Kyuubi was sealed inside him, they lit the bonfire. The worst part through was that the boy had been burning for 3 hours straight. the Kyuubi trying to heal its prison in an attempt to live. But it seemed that even the great Kyuubi no Kitsune couldn't heal everything. According to the doctors, Naruto had suffered third-degree burns over his entire body, and it seemed that even though it was healing, his body would never be free of the scars. About 16 hours earlier, Naruto was sitting on his bed in his apartment. Today was his 7th birthday, and like all his previous birthdays, he spent it alone. His apartment was made up of just 2 rooms, the main room, which had his bed and a small table, and a small kitchen he didn't know how to use. The once white wallpaper was peeling off the walls, and the carpet was covered in strange reddish-brown stains from all the times the villagers had come and beat him. There was one window that looked out onto the street but had several cracks and missing pieces of glass from where people had thrown rocks into his room. The other room was what the old man said was supposed to be his bathroom. It did have all the basic things that one would find in a bathroom: a toilet, a sink, it even had a shower. The problem, however, was that he never had any hot water, so whenever he took one it hurt because it was so cold. He also learned that before he moved in, someone, probably his landlord, after hearing that he was moving in, had disconnected the water pipe that went to the toilet. This meant that he needed to put water in it himself when he wanted to flush. The problem with this, though, was that he could barely reach the top of the toilet. He looked around his small apartment. He was lucky the old man could get him it really. Sure, it was small, but it's not like he had much stuff. And it was still better than when he was living on the streets. 3 years ago, on his 4th birthday, the orphanage had told him that they didn't have room for him anymore and threw him out, literally. One of the care workers had thrown him out by the scruff of his neck. The first few weeks had been hard, but he soon learned which bins would have food and which alleys would have boxes that he could sleep in. But then the villagers had found him. That was when the beatings had started. Luckily, the old man had found him. He didn't trust him at first. It wasn't the first time someone had tricked him. He could remember once how a nice old lady had invited him into her house to eat when she found him looking through her bins. As soon as he was in, she locked the door and proceeded to beat him with her walking stick, screaming something about how he had killed her only son. He finally managed to get away from her by jumping through a window. It was also the very first time he noticed that he healed very fast. When he had got far enough away, he had stopped and looked at his arms, filled with shards of glass from the window. Then, right in front of his eyes, the glass was pushed out of his skin and the wounds had healed. After that, he didn't know what to think, but just assumed that it was the same for everyone and didn't think about it again. The old man had been careful when he saw him, shocked as well. But after getting over the shock, he took a shivering Naruto to the hospital, and after getting him looked at, he brought him here. Being a good friend of his since the beginning of the year, Y.N and Su-hyuk do many things together, and of course, she starts liking him. One day though, an infection that was about a year ago. He never left the apartment. All his food was brought to him, so he never needed to. Not that it stopped the villagers. The old man would visit him every now and then. But the old man hadn't had time as of late. Naruto didn't know what he actually did, but he knew it was important. Lost in his thoughts, he didn't even realize that he started singing to himself. And quote, "Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday, Naruto. Happy birthday to me. And quote. By the end of the song, Naruto was shedding silent tears. Why? Why did he have to be alone? Why? Why did the villagers hate him? And quote. Why? 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 And quote. At the end of his rant, Naruto stood up and threw the glass of water in his hand into a wall. Not being able to take it anymore, he threw himself onto his bed and sobbed into the mattress. While this was going on, Anbu Captain Hitaki Kakashi was looking through the window from his perch on the building across the street. His heart ached at the sight before him. No one should have to go through what he had, and defiantly not a young boy. Kakashi had been the boy's guard ever since the Hokage had found the boy in a back alley, half frozen from the cold. When he had first seen the boy in the hospital, he thought he was actually dead. The Hokage had called him straight to his office and told him what had happened. He had volunteered to be the boy's bodyguard straight away. The Hokage had agreed but had to set certain rules. The boy was still a civilian after all, and he couldn't actually be given a guard. So, they had come up with a solution. Kakashi spent almost all his spare time watching the boy. This made it so he could stop anyone that he could from going after the boy, mostly civilians, but there were a few ninjas as well. The only problem with this was that he still needed to go on missions, so nobody would realize that the boy actually had protection and was not just a passing Anbu. Kakashi knew who the boy's parents were. Really, you would need to be completely blind not to. He had his mother's last name for a start. And as for his father, well, just look at him, he was a carbon copy. The only difference between the two was the skinny frame and whisker marks on his cheeks. So, caught up in his thoughts, Kakashi didn't notice the black-clad figure behind him. By the time he realized that someone was there, it was too late. The next thing Kakashi knew, there was feeling a sharp pain in the back of his head, and then nothing. After an hour or so of crying, Naruto had finally fallen asleep. His dreams were full of faceless people, villagers. They all had one thing in common. They hurt him. His dreams were always the same, at least that was when he could get to sleep. It was very rare for Naruto to sleep more than an hour at a time. He didn't know why. He just didn't seem to really need to sleep. But when he did, it was always the same. He would always have nightmares. Some of them, like the one he was having now, was just of all the times he was mobbed. Other times he had nightmares of strange creatures, odd things. Some of them didn't even seem to have a shape, shades in the shadows of his dreams. The thing that scared him the most, though, was when he had a dream about it. The fox. He didn't know why, but it was always the clearest thing in his nightmares. And it was the one thing that was always there. Whenever he slept, no matter what he was dreaming, it would always make an appearance. A large fox, bigger than any building he had seen in Konoha, bigger even than the Hokage monument. With its blood-red fur and teeth larger than a full-grown man, it was the most frightening thing he had ever seen. But the most terrifying thing about it was the eyes. Large red pools of moving liquid fire ringed in black with a black slit going down the middle. It was like the two colors were fighting for dominance, a never-ending battle. But it was the eyes that haunted Naruto in his waking hours. They held no real emotion, no malice, no happiness, nothing. just a primal instinct, primal need. And yet they shone with an odd intellect. It was like the fox was both a beast yet intelligent at the same time. Naruto was woken when he heard loud banging at his door. Instantly he knew what was going on. It happened all the time. Sitting up in his bed, he just stared at the door, waiting. He knew from experience that there was no point in hiding. They always found him. It didn't take them long to get through the door, and when they did, Naruto saw a large number of people all crowded in the corridor outside his room. He recognized some of them from previous mobs: the middle-aged fat man that had no hair, the old man with the long white beard and one eye. And then there was the woman with the pink hair. She was a regular when it came to his mobs. Hell, half the time she was the instigator. With her pink hair and green eyes, she normally stood out in a crowd. She had on an elegant red dress with a strange white pattern. She looked like she was going out on a night in the town, not leading a mob to a small boy. They just stood there in the doorway for a moment. The pink-haired lady had a smug look on her face, just staring at him. Her voice was cold. She turned around and went to wait outside. And quote, "Take it outside." And quote. With those 3 words, she had broken the floodgates. The men lurched forward and roughly grabbed the boy. Naruto could smell the alcohol on their breath. This was bad. It was always worse when they were drunk. After they dragged him outside, Naruto saw more people. This was very bad. There had never been this many people before. For the next half hour, the mob proceeded to beat, stab and bludgeon the small boy until there was nothing left to hurt. Throughout the whole experience, Naruto never made a sound, not even scream. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. This just seemed to make them angrier. But as soon as they stopped, he started to heal. It was then that the pink-haired woman came back into view. And quote, "Tie him to the post." And quote. Again Naruto was hurled up and dragged to a post that someone had stuck to the ground and built a bonfire around it. Now, Naruto might be young, but even he could see what was going to happen. If he could have put up a fight as they tied him to the post, he would, but he was still healing. When he was secured to the post with ninja wire, the mob moved back, and 5 black-clad people with hoods stopping anyone from seeing their faces stepped out of the crowd and just stood there, surrounding the unlit bonfire. When the crowd had quieted down a bit, the pink-haired lady stepped forward and stared at him. After a minute of just looking into his eyes, she smirked and turned to address the crowd. And quote, "Tonight, we right the wrongs that have been done to us. Tonight, we take our revenge on this thing." And quote. At this point, she throws her right arm out toward Naruto. The crowd began to cheer as her words got more and more heated. Someone in the crowd got so worked up by this that they threw an empty sake bottle at the beaten boy. Then Naruto said one thing, one question that he needed answered. And quote, "Why?" And quote, "No one answered." After waiting for the crowd to settle down again, she continued. And quote, "7 years ago, the Kyuubi attacked this village, destroyed our homes, and killed our families. Tonight we take our revenge. This boy has the Kyuubi sealed inside him. Therefore he is the Kyuubi. The Hokage may be fooled by its facade, but we are not." And quote. At the end of her tirade, she turned to look at the boy. Naruto was shocked. He didn't understand. He was the Kyuubi? That was impossible, wasn't it? His thoughts flashed to his nightmares, to a giant red fox. What if it was true? What if he was the Kyuubi? It made sense. The glares, the beating, the hate, it was all because he was the Kyuubi. But if he was the Kyuubi, why didn't he remember? If he had killed all those people, he would remember. But before he had time to truly think about this, the pink-haired lady raised her hands and looked at each of the 5 people around the fire. And quat. Light it up. And quat. And with that, the 5 people around the bonfire started to make hand seals. When they finished, 5 voices could be heard saying, and quat. Fire style. Great fireball jutsu and quat. 11 5 balls of fire simultaneously struck the bonfire and lit it. It didn't take long for the heat to get too much for Naruto. He tried not to scream, to keep to his personal vow of silence. But he just couldn't. He let it out. All the years of pain that these people had caused him, all the things they had done. He just let it all out. He screamed. He screamed so loud that it actually made them stop cheering for a moment, but the moment passed and they started again. Soon he started to feel his skin melting off. It was indescribable. He was in so much pain. Then he noticed in his pain-fogged mind that he was lifetime of burning, writhing in agony, nothing but him and the flames. At some point in time, he felt the fire stop. He suddenly started to feel very cold. He had become so used to the heat that he couldn't stop shivering. The last thing he saw before he finally slipped into the abyss that was his mind was the old man, looking down at him with a sad face. When Naruto woke up, he didn't know where he was, and he didn't care. There was no pain. He was numb. He felt nothing, both physically and mentally. Slowly he started to notice his surroundings. He was in some sort of huge underground cavern, with a solid stone wall all around him and a barely visible stone roof. To one side he noticed a giant gate. The weird thing was that it seemed to be held shut with nothing more than a piece of paper. As he stood up, he realized that he was knee-deep in some kind of strange water. It took him a minute to realize what it was. It wasn't water at all. It was blood. And he still didn't care. It was then that he heard it, a low rumbling sound off in the distance. At first, he thought it was thunder, but then remembered he was underground. Whatever it was getting louder. Turning towards the gate, he realized what he was hearing. Growling. And how did he figure that out? By looking at the giant red fox on the other side of the gate. He stared up into its face, into its fire-like eyes. The eyes that had haunted his nightmares for as long as he could remember. And for the first time they didn't scare him. He felt empty, numb. The two just stared at each other for what felt like hours, until finally. And quat. And quat. It was strange to see a fox laugh. His voice was so deep he could feel the vibrations all around him. And quat. I have lived for thousands of years and never have I known a human, a child no less, to look at me with no fear. Maybe you won't be such a bad host. And quat. And quat. So it's true. You being here must mean the things the pink-haired lady said were true. Though I can't tell where we are, it does seem oddly familiar. And quat. that made the fox stop its laughter in his tracks. The boy's voice sounded wrong. It had no emotion, no feeling. It actually sent a shiver up the QB's spine to hear such an empty tone in a child's voice. It was then the fox took a good look at the boy. He had a plain white t-shirt with a pair of black shorts. His spiky blonde hair went in all directions and 3 whisker-like marks on each cheek. But what really caught his attention were his eyes. Eyes that were normally full of life no matter what happened, eyes that would brighten up the room just by being there, were now dead. They held no light in him, no shine of happiness, no flashes of anger, nothing. They were the eyes of an old man that had seen too much and had given up, waiting for death. But a child shouldn't have the eyes of old men. They were supposed to be filled with childlike curiosity and naivety. The QB didn't know what to think of this. He had never seen eyes like that, especially not in the eyes of a 7-year-old boy. And quote, "We are in your mindscape. It is a place in your subconscious mind, a bridge, if you will, between the two of us. A physical representation of our minds." And quote. Naruto thought about that for a moment, seeming to be getting his thoughts in order. And quote, "I take it the blood was you, which means that my mind is a sewer." And quote. Naruto had been trying to figure out where he was since he got up. It only hit him when the fox said it was his mind. That made the fox laugh again. He was starting to actually like this kid.